Wow, do I have big time news for you guys of what's happening nationwide as well as in our local Utah housing market. If we take a look here, corporate layoffs have ramped up in recent weeks. I shared that last week, but check this out what's happening here in Utah. Pluralsight moving headquarters to Texas, laying off 17% of its workforce. Now, I was actually recording this video here this morning. I'm going to drop it this morning as well. And some big time news came out with what Powell said about interest rates. I'm going to share that as well. Big time news coming on the interest rates and what's going to happen here. And I was actually going to touch base on all that. So it was perfect that I couldn't record this yesterday, and this breaking news is coming to you. Now, Pluralsight moving headquarters. They employ 2,500 people nationwide, I believe it is. Definitely not here in Utah. Worldwide, nationwide. 2,500. But they're leaving their headquarters here in Draper, Utah, and they're moving to Texas. Now, that is going to have big impacts on the housing market, as people are going to be losing jobs, as well as less people eating in the restaurants around these buildings. And I shared that article last time, and I've been sharing it for a few years. As of 2021, only 5% of tech companies that are valued at $1 billion or more are able to actually generate a profit. Now, Utah has the most tech startup companies percentage-wise than any other state. I've read this in some articles. Now, don't quote me on that, but I've read this multiple times. So if we do see a recession, how would that impact things here in our local housing market if we have the most tech startup companies, only 5% are profitable, and majority of them have not been through a recession? So keep an eye on that. But right here, we see that. Now, I'm going to touch base with what's going on with the 30-year as well as the 10-year and the breaking news of what Jerome Powell just said. However, before I get to that, the point of this was to show you the state of the economy as well as what's going on with interest rates. Right here, if we take a look, CarMax increases loan loss provisions amid uncertain economic outlook. And I've been saying that the Fed is behind on their rate cuts and that they most likely would have cut rates by now if it wasn't for the tariff wars that Trump put in place. And that is what I'm going to touch, that Jerome Powell just gave us breaking news on interest rates. So right there, we see that CarMax increases loan loss provisions amid uncertain outlook. Right here, if we scroll down, used car retail CarMax saw greater losses, loan losses, and economic uncertainty during the quarter ended in May of 31. So right here, we're seeing things that are bad, and this is supposed to be the spring selling season, tax season. So tax season isn't saving the car industry. The spring season is not saving the housing industry. So we're seeing things really slowing down. Now, they're not the only ones. I'm sure you might have heard about this. This has been a big one here, and it's going to take place at the end of the year. Nissan is trying to plan drastic moves to save itself from financial ruin. And Honda was supposed to buy them out. They were supposed to have a merger, and that fell apart. And now, with the uncertainty in the economy, with the tariff wars, nobody even wants to consider purchasing Nissan. Are we going to have a juggernaut go out of business? How would that be worldwide, nationwide? I mean, that would be what? 20, 30, 40, 50,000 jobs globally. Who knows how many jobs? I mean, that's a big one. Right here, we also see that Stellantis records a 70% fall in profits amid plunging North American sales and a search for a new CEO, which they have put in place now. But Stellantis is Jeep, Dodge, and Ram, and they're not doing great. So you're seeing the car industry, the housing industry. These are the two markets that Americans spend more money on than anything else, and they're not doing good. Now, I'm going to pretty soon here, I'm going to touch base with what Jerome Powell just stated, so stay tuned to that. And then right here, we see that Tesla's European car sales nosedive for a 5th month as customers switch to Chinese EVs. Now, Tesla is another one that's extremely overvalued, and we're seeing this. So Tesla sales are falling worldwide except one country, and that's Norway. Now, one thing that Trump right here, this is where I'm getting into it. This is where Jerome Powell's breaking news. Now, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button. Do me a favor, help me grow the YouTube channel. Do yourself a favor, subscribe. That way you're notified when these new videos drop. Smash the like button so this video can go in front of more people, because this information, nobody else is sharing it. That way, everybody can have access to it. So smash that like button. Right here, Jerome Powell is potentially going to be replaced very soon by Trump. Now, he cannot be replaced. His term is until May of 2026. So Trump has to deal with Jerome Powell for at least almost another year. However, the breaking news, this is not the breaking news. Let me actually share the breaking news with you guys. Right here, Powell confirms that the Fed would have cut by now if it were not for tariffs. And what have I been saying? That the Fed is behind on their rate cut and that they most likely would have cut if it wasn't for Trump's tariffs. And here is Jerome Powell stating that exact fact, that Powell confirms that the Fed would have cut by now if it were not for tariffs. That means when they do start cutting rates, they're going to be too late. There's going to be things potentially in the economy breaking. And this is where he was saying last time, I've shared this, when they were coming out, that they believe that unemployment is going to go up a little bit higher than what their initial gauge was. And that's because they know that they're behind on cutting the Fed rate, but they're between a rock and a hard place. If they cut, they risk the fact that inflation could come back, the tariff wars could escalate even further. Anyway, this could also be the fact that Trump considers naming the next Fed chairman early to undermine Powell. Now, the way that this happens is right here, an early announcement. Let me scroll that down. An early announcement could let the chair in waiting influence investors' expectations about interest rates. Now, I'm going to touch base into that as well, but first, I want to show you guys something here, and make sure that you sign up for my articles. I send them out monthly, and these articles are this newsletter. What it does is it shows you inventory year over year, and it's broken down into different counties and the different regions: the Greater Salt Lake area, the Wasatch Back, Park City, St. George, the Logan area. That way you're able to monitor what's going on with inventory in the market that you're interested in. Of course, when you need a realtor, Dingo the Realtor has your back like nobody else. My contact information is down below. Now, we see that the 30-year, and I showed this last time, came down pretty significantly in 1 week's time. Now, this most likely, the fact that Powell is confirming that they would have cut if it was not for tariffs, that potentially could cause the 10-year to come down even further, which would potentially correlate with the interest rates coming down. Now, last time I forgot to exactly explain the correlation between the 10-year and the 30-year mortgage or interest rates, and I was going to do that, and I kind of touched base on it, but I was sharing a lot of information. So the way that the 10-year is actually positioned is it's not what the Fed does today. So let's say the Fed cut rates just today, and then they said, we're not cutting rates for a whole nother year. We're absolutely not cutting anything. That actually would be more negative than if the Fed did not cut rates today and the Fed said, we're going to do 5 rate cuts in the next 12 months. The 10-year, what it does is it prices in where is the Fed rate going to be a year from today. That's why the chair in waiting can influence what the market does, is because the 10-year correlates with what the expectations are of interest rates being a year from today. So that's how the 10-year correlates. That's why the news impacts with what's going to happen with mortgages, and the Fed rate, of course, cutting that as well. But it's the outlook of where things are going to be in a year. Now, the one thing that I also wanted to touch base last time, the article didn't load up, and I kind of touched base on it, but look at this. Some 2.4 million of newly delinquent borrowers previously had credit scores above 620, which are considered good and would have allowed them to qualify for a new car or a mortgage and credit cards before delinquencies were reported, the Fed researchers said. Now, I touched base on this for years as well. How many people have bought cars, have bought houses because student loans were suspended and the delinquencies were taken off of credit scores? That means people were qualifying for cars, for credit cards, for houses, that if the delinquencies were not removed, they would not have the credit score to get that purchase. So how many people have bought homes and cars and extended credit cards and got new credit cards that otherwise wouldn't have? It is not all peachy and dandy. We definitely don't have a free market anymore. We're seeing people impacted with the credit scores, with student loans resuming, and this isn't even in full force. They keep kicking the foreclosures. Both administrations, the Biden, the Trump administration, keep kicking foreclosures down the road. The commercial real estate refinance boom, since their loans are 3 to 5 years, they keep kicking that every year. They kicked it again here to the end of 2025, at the end of 2024, because office buildings, retail business, just a lot of commercial space doesn't have the value, and they wouldn't be able to support these interest rates. So we see that we don't have a free market. If we had a free market, I would definitely be saying full out housing crash. However, if you take a look at this chart, you see how much they are printing. Oh, that just disappeared on me. There we go. So you take a look at this, and when we went away from this gold standard in 1970, you see that every decade the printing machine just gets worse and worse, and the government gets worse and worse, and the government officials make more and more money while they are putting our country in a nightmare situation for the future. Now, the PCE came in slightly higher. This is what the Fed was using to not cut rates. So if this continues happening, that July rate cut could potentially not happen. However, the fact Jerome Powell has come out and said that they would have cut, I think that that actually increases the odds of that July 30th rate cut. However, I do think that they're still wanting to hold strong. So we'll see what happens there at the end of July. And we see that the inventory year over year is still, now that's not sure what's going on with my computer. It's not loading, but we're seeing, here we go. So that's the first one I showed you guys, and that's that gap. That's the gap that we have year over year. So we see that that gap is slightly closing here towards the end. We see that in the spring, right, April and May, we see that that was the biggest margin of the year. However, we see that inventory is still extremely elevated, and that's that blue-purple line at the top compared to years past. Nobody has your back like Dinko the Realtor. Smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and sign up for that newsletter. That way you're notified. And the next one's coming out here right after the 4th of July. So next Wednesday, I'm going to be sending out that article with the inventory growth year over year in the whole entire marketplace of Utah, and then as well as in the separate counties, the separate marketplaces. And when you do need a realtor, my contact information is down below in the description.